Welcome to True Echo, where stories of love, betrayal, and redemption echo louder than words. What you're about to hear might sound like fiction, but for someone out there, it's the truth they've lived. Tonight, we bring you a story of dignity tested, prejudice unmasked, and a love strong enough to silence an entire room. The late afternoon sun cast golden light through the Bel Air mansion's windows, a glow that made marble floors shimmer like liquid fire. Celeste Williams stood before her closet, her fingers brushing across fabrics, silks, satins, designer gowns gifted to her by her husband. Yet she reached past them all, pulling out a simple navy blue dress, the one she always felt most herself in. At 28, Celeste's beauty was quiet but undeniable, warm brown skin that seemed to radiate light, eyes dark and deep with compassion, framed by lashes that needed no artifice. There was a softness about her that never demanded attention, yet always held it once given. She slipped into the dress, fastened a silver necklace Adrian had given her for their second anniversary, and caught her reflection. A woman balanced between two worlds stared back, the Detroit girl who'd grown up with nothing, and the wife of one of America's youngest billionaires. From the bathroom came the sound of running water. Adrian Williams, her husband, her partner, her fiercest protector, was finishing his shower. At 35, he was the definition of commanding presence, 6 feet 2 inches, lean yet powerful, green eyes that had built Nexus Innovations into a $2 billion empire. Tonight, however, he wasn't a CEO. He was simply a husband preparing for date night. "Celeste, darling, are you ready?" "Reservations at 7:30, he called. "I'm ready," she answered softly. When Adrian stepped out moments later in his charcoal gray suit, he paused. His eyes softened when they landed on her. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice tinged with something more. Concern. A silent question lingering. "I know what you're thinking," Celeste teased gently, straightening his tie even though it didn't need adjusting. "You wanted me to wear the Valentino." "I want you to wear whatever makes you happy," Adrian replied, thumb brushing her cheek. "It's just. Spago attracts a certain crowd. People judge first, ask questions never. I don't want anyone treating you poorly." Her heart ached at his words. This was the tension of their marriage, his instinct to protect colliding with her need to remain true to herself. She started to turn back to the closet, but his hand stopped her. "No. I fell in love with the woman who wore a $15 dress to our first coffee date and made it look like $1 million. Don't change for anyone. Not even me." Their eyes met, and both smiled at the memory. That tiny cafe in Westwood, the barista nodding along as Celeste passionately debated educational inequality, while Adrian, a stranger then, watched her with awe. That was the moment that had changed everything. By 7 o'clock, they were in Adrian's midnight blue Bentley, gliding through Beverly Hills. Celeste gazed at the passing boutiques and restaurants, their lights glittering like stars fallen to earth. Yet a knot tightened in her stomach. These weren't her spaces, not really. "You belong everywhere I belong," Adrian reassured, squeezing her hand as if he could feel her unease. And yet, when the Bentley rolled to a stop outside Spago Beverly Hills, with its glowing facade and red carpet clientele, Celeste's heart thudded harder. She stepped out in her flats, her simple dress, while women in glittering gowns swept past, their diamonds catching every light. Inside, the maitre d' greeted them warmly. "Mr. Williams. Mrs. Williams. Your usual table is ready." They were ushered into a softly lit dining room humming with quiet elegance. Crystal glasses sparkled. Conversations floated, refined and calculated. And eyes, so many eyes, shifted toward them. Celeste felt them, curious glances, dismissive ones, subtle whispers. She'd learned to recognize the look people gave her before turning their full attention to Adrian, as though she were background to his brilliance. "Relax," Adrian whispered. "You're the most beautiful woman here. And the kindest." Her lips parted to respond, but his phone buzzed sharply. He frowned at the screen. Tokyo office. The Yamamoto deal. I need to take this, 5 minutes. Go, Celeste said, smiling softly. I'll be fine. He kissed her forehead before retreating toward the bar. Alone, Celeste sipped her water and let the atmosphere wash over her. She almost began to relax, until she noticed a woman staring. Blonde, immaculately styled, perhaps mid-40s. Her white Chanel dress glowed beneath the soft lights, diamonds glittering at her throat. Her eyes, however, were shards of ice. The longer Celeste sat, the clearer it became, this woman's gaze wasn't curiosity. It was contempt. And then, like a storm cloud breaking, the woman rose. She excused herself from her companions and strode directly toward Celeste's table, heels clicking like the opening notes of war. Celeste's heart tightened. She had seen this look before, back in Detroit, in grocery stores, in classrooms, in job interviews. The look that said you don't belong here. Excuse me, the woman said, her tone dripping with false civility. Her blue eyes swept over Celeste's dress, her shoes, her entire being. I think there's been some kind of mistake. Celeste lifted her chin. What kind of mistake? The woman's lips curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You seem lost. This is Spago Beverly Hills. Around them, the air shifted. Conversations hushed. Heads turned. A ripple of anticipation moved through the room like a wave. And in that instant, Celeste knew, this night was about to test every ounce of strength she had. The words, lost, hung in the air like a taunt, and Celeste's fingers trembled slightly against the water glass she held. She had hoped she'd misread the woman's gaze, but now there was no mistaking the hostility radiating from her. Every syllable was dipped in entitlement, sharpened with disdain. I'm not lost, Celeste replied quietly, though her voice carried enough strength to slice through the murmurs that had begun among the watching diners. I'm having dinner with my husband. The blonde woman's laugh was brittle, the sound of glass cracking under too much pressure. She tilted her head in exaggerated disbelief, her jewelry catching the glow of the chandeliers as she leaned closer. Your husband? Her gaze flicked around theatrically. Funny, I don't see anyone with you. And forgive me, dear, but I'm struggling to understand how someone like you could afford to sit at a table like this. The words stung like acid, delivered not only to Celeste but to the entire room, a performance crafted for maximum humiliation. And it worked. Forks hovered in midair, glasses were set down slowly, and the silence thickened as people turned their attention fully to this unfolding drama. Celeste felt the heat rise in her chest. Someone like you. She had heard it before, in different forms, in different tones, but always with the same venom. People who looked at her brown skin and her modest clothes and decided that was all they needed to know. My husband stepped away to take a business call, she said, keeping her voice steady. How convenient, the woman sneered, leaning down so close that Celeste could smell her expensive perfume. A mysterious husband who just so happens to vanish the moment someone asks a question. Sweetheart, let me make this clear, this establishment has standards. People like you don't simply wander in and claim premium tables. Celeste's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Around her, she could see diners exchanging glances, some discomfort, others nodding in subtle agreement. She wasn't just fighting Patricia Hartwell, though she didn't know the woman's name yet, she was fighting the weight of collective prejudice pressing in from every side. She drew in a breath. Adrian's words from earlier returned to her. You belong everywhere I belong. She clung to them like a lifeline. I have every right to be here, Celeste said, more firmly this time. The blonde woman straightened, lips curving in a smile so sharp it was more of a sneer. Rights, she repeated, her voice rising just enough to draw more attention. Oh, darling, rights don't buy $30 appetizers. Rights don't make you belong here. Her eyes swept Celeste's dress again. That thing you're wearing? Target, maybe? And those shoes? Pay less, if we're being generous. Tell me, do you enjoy playing dress-up? A hush fell so complete that even the soft jazz floating through the speakers seemed muted. The cruelty was breathtaking, not just in its substance but in its casual delivery. Patricia, though Celeste still didn't know her name, wasn't simply insulting her. She was stripping her humanity in front of a room full of strangers, daring her to shrink, to disappear. But something inside Celeste resisted. It was the same resilience that had carried her through nights of double shifts at the diner, through years of being underestimated, through every subtle dismissal of her worth. "My clothes don't determine my value," she said, her voice calm but clear. "And they don't give you the right to judge me." The woman's eyes widened in mock surprise. "Value? Oh, sweetheart, let me explain value. I'm Patricia Hartwell. My husband owns half the commercial real estate in Beverly Hills. We donate more to charity in a single year than you probably make in a decade. I know everyone who matters in this city, and I can promise you, none of them would appreciate having their evening disturbed by someone pretending to belong where they clearly don't." Her words drew gasps, not just for their cruelty but for the audacity of announcing her wealth and influence as though it granted her immunity from decency. Patricia turned slightly, ensuring the diners around them could hear every syllable. Celeste felt her pulse race, her palms damp against the cool glass of water she still hadn't set down. Yet she kept her gaze level. "I'm not pretending to be anything," she said softly. Patricia leaned closer, her voice dropping but still carrying in the hushed dining room. "Then let me save you further embarrassment. Leave. Quietly. While you still can. Or I'll make sure everyone here knows exactly what kind of woman you are." The threat was venomous, coiled tight with arrogance. Celeste's stomach twisted. Every instinct screamed at her to stand up and walk away, to end this nightmare before it escalated further. But something deeper rooted her to her seat. The memory of Adrian's hand in hers, his promise that she belonged anywhere he did. "I'm not leaving," she whispered. Patricia's smile shattered into rage. Color flooded her face. And then, with a speed that stunned the room, her hand shot through the air. The sound of the slap was sharp, violent, echoing through Spago Beverly Hills like a gunshot. Celeste's cheek flared with pain, the sting radiating into her ear, her eyes watering instantly from the shock. Gasps rippled across the restaurant, phones lifted higher to record. Patricia Hartwell had crossed a line no amount of wealth or status could excuse. She had just made the single greatest mistake of her life. And in the next 60 seconds, her entire world would begin to collapse. The sting burned across Celeste's cheek, radiating in hot pulses that made her eyes sting with involuntary tears. For a fraction of a second, she sat frozen, her hand rising instinctively to touch the tender skin. The restaurant was utterly still. Forks hovered, wine glasses paused midair, and conversations collapsed into silence. Even the soft jazz piping through the speakers seemed suddenly obscene, its cheerful notes clashing against the violence that had just erupted. Patricia Hartwell stood over her like a victorious general, her manicured hand still trembling faintly from the blow. Her chest heaved, her eyes glittered with cruel satisfaction. "There," she declared loudly enough for every corner of Spago to hear. "Maybe now you'll understand. You can't just waltz into places you don't belong and expect to be treated like you matter." Gasps rippled around the dining room. Some diners shifted in their seats, scandalized but unwilling to intervene. Others lifted their phones higher, capturing every moment of the unfolding scene. A few even whispered, their faces lit by the glow of searches, typing furiously, "Who is she? What just happened?" Celeste's pulse thundered in her ears. She could taste copper on her tongue where her teeth had cut the inside of her lip. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand justice. But instead, what left her lips was a whisper. "You hit me." Her words trembled but carried, sharp against the silence. Patricia sniffed disdainfully, smoothing her Chanel dress as if nothing more serious than a wrinkle had occurred. I defended myself, she lied, her voice cold. You were aggressive. Everyone saw how threatening you became. I had no choice. The audacity stole the breath from Celeste's lungs. She had been sitting quietly at her table, enduring insult after insult, when Patricia escalated to violence, and now she dared to twist reality. A flicker of panic danced through Celeste. Could she? Would the crowd believe Patricia's wealth, her name, her presence, over Celeste's quiet protest? She was perfectly polite, came a voice from near the windows. An elderly man with kind eyes pushed back his chair, his voice firm enough to slice through the tension. I saw the entire thing. That young lady never raised her voice. You, madam, were the aggressor. All eyes swung toward him. For a heartbeat, Patricia's composure cracked, her face flushing scarlet. She turned on the man, snapping, "No one asked you." But the room had already shifted. Murmurs rose, diners exchanging looks, whispers of "I saw it too," she did nothing, weaving through the crowd. Celeste rose slowly from her chair, her legs trembling beneath her, but her voice steadied. You attacked me because you thought I was powerless. Because you decided I didn't belong. The word she wanted to say trembled on her lips: racism. She could feel the weight of it pressing against the room. Patricia's eyes narrowed, sensing it too. Don't you dare, Patricia hissed under her breath, her perfect smile tightening for the watching crowd. Don't you dare play that card. Celeste's chest heaved. For a moment, she thought she might collapse under the humiliation, the rage, the exhaustion of years of quiet battles like this. Then, just as the silence seemed unbearable, a ripple swept through the crowd. The air shifted. Heads turned. A few diners straightened instinctively, as though a new gravity had entered the room. Celeste followed their gaze. Adrian was walking back toward their table. At first, she barely recognized him. Gone was the easy smile, the calm control. His jaw was clenched tight, his green eyes ablaze with a fury so cold it felt dangerous. The air around him seemed to crackle, his stride long, unyielding, as though nothing and no one could stop him. People instinctively leaned back as he passed, parting like water before a prowling predator. Patricia misread his approach entirely. Relief washed across her face, her lips curving in a triumphant smile. Thank God, she announced loudly, making sure the entire room could hear. Finally, someone with authority. Sir, please, tell this woman she doesn't belong here. She's been nothing but trouble since she arrived. Adrian stopped directly beside Celeste, his gaze never leaving Patricia. His hand rose, featherlight, brushing his wife's burning cheek. The tender gesture contrasted so violently with the storm in his eyes that several diners gasped audibly. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady, but edged with menace that made every syllable vibrate with power. Did you just put your hands on my wife? The word slammed into the silence like a thunderclap. A collective gasp spread through the room, audible as if the entire restaurant had inhaled at once. Patrons who had been filming suddenly froze, their phones trembling in their hands. Patricia's triumphant smile faltered. Her eyes widened as the words sank in, her head snapping between Adrian's towering figure and Celeste's tear-streaked face. Your wife, she stammered, her voice cracking. Adrian stepped forward, placing himself fully between Patricia and Celeste, his protective presence radiating like a shield. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The steel threaded through his tone was more terrifying than a shout. My wife, he repeated, each word a hammer blow. Celeste Williams. The woman you just assaulted in front of an entire restaurant of witnesses. The name landed like an earthquake. Whispers erupted. Adrian Williams? Nexus Innovations? Billionaire? Diners began typing frantically into their phones, confirmation flashing across glowing screens. It's him. Oh my God, it's him. Patricia staggered back, her face draining of color until her carefully applied makeup looked like war paint on a ghost. I didn't know, she whispered hoarsely. Adrian's gaze narrowed, unrelenting. Didn't know what? That she was my wife? Or that she was a human being deserving of basic respect? Patricia's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Around them, the crowd was no longer merely watching. They were bearing witness. And Patricia Hartwell, the queen of Beverly Hills arrogance, had just realized that her entire kingdom was crumbling around her. Patricia's knees trembled, her hand darting to the back of a nearby chair as though it could anchor her against the tidal wave of consequences crashing toward her. Her perfectly coiffed hair, her designer dress, her glittering diamonds, none of it seemed to matter anymore. Not under the glare of Adrian Williams, a man whose very presence commanded boardrooms and governments alike. I didn't know, she repeated weakly, her voice cracking, her mask slipping. Adrian's eyes narrowed to icy slits. Didn't know what, Mrs. Hartwell? That she was my wife? His voice cut like a blade, each word enunciated with lethal precision. Or that she is a human being deserving of dignity, regardless of her last name? Patricia's lips quivered. She opened her mouth, but only a strangled sound came out. Adrian took a step closer. At 6 feet 2 inches, his shadow fell over her like a judgment passed from on high. Explain it to me, he demanded, his tone soft, too soft, the kind of softness that frightened more than shouting ever could. What exactly did you think gave you the right to approach my wife, berate her, humiliate her, and then lay your hands on her? Patricia's carefully painted face crumpled under the weight of his words. But pride, that poisonous pride, refused to die. I thought she was out of place, she stammered. She didn't look like she belonged here. The silence that followed was devastating. Even those who might have remained neutral shifted in their seats, discomfort radiating across the room. Every syllable Patricia uttered exposed her bigotry, her entitlement, and now her desperate foolishness. Adrian's jaw clenched. So you admit it. You judged my wife based on her appearance. You decided she was unworthy of this restaurant, unworthy of existing in the same space as you. And for that, you assaulted her. No, Patricia backpedaled, her words tripping over themselves. I barely touched her. It was just. The mark on her face says otherwise, interrupted the elderly man from the corner. His voice was stronger now, emboldened by the righteous fury swirling in the room. And I will testify to what I saw if legal action is pursued. Patricia spun on him, rage and panic mixing in her voice. No one asked for your opinion, old man. This is between me and her. Adrian's voice sliced through her outburst. It became between you and me the moment you struck my wife. He turned slightly, addressing the room as though it were a jury, and in many ways, it was. Every single person here saw what happened. Every single phone recording will tell the same story. My wife did nothing but sit here, quietly waiting for me. And Patricia Hartwell decided that her dignity was disposable. The murmurs intensified. Diners glanced at their screens, some already live streaming, others texting feverishly. Patricia could see it in their faces, her reputation, her carefully curated social standing, was unraveling in real time. The restaurant manager, pale and sweating, hurried forward at last. His crisp black suit and polished shoes did nothing to disguise his trembling hands. Mr. Williams, he said quickly, his voice tinged with panic. Please, allow me to apologize. We strive to ensure all our guests are treated with the highest respect. This incident is unacceptable. Adrian turned his gaze on him, sharp as a whip. Unacceptable? A woman was assaulted in your restaurant, Robert. My wife. And your first instinct was what? To move her to another section? To avoid confronting the so-called pillar of society who caused the problem. The manager flinched visibly, his composure cracking. I only wanted to de-escalate, sir. Adrian's voice was cold steel. You don't de-escalate by moving the victim. You stand up for what's right. Or is that only reserved for guests wealthy enough to matter? The shame on Robert's face was visible to all. Diners shook their heads, whispers of disapproval rippling through the room. Patricia looked around desperately, searching for support, but found only folded arms, narrowed eyes, and the glow of dozens of phones capturing her downfall. Celeste, her cheeks still throbbing, spoke for the first time since Adrian's arrival. Her voice was soft but carried through the silence like a clear bell. She told me I didn't belong. That my dress made me pathetic. That I should leave before I embarrassed myself further. A collective intake of breath swept the room. Celeste's calm recounting, stripped of drama, exposed Patricia's cruelty more nakedly than any accusation could have. She called me a con artist, Celeste continued, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger. She said I was pretending to have a husband, that I was trying to seduce a wealthy man or planning to sue the restaurant. And when I refused to leave, she slapped me. Adrian turned back to Patricia, his fury simmering just beneath the surface. You humiliated her. You tried to break her spirit. And when she refused to bow to you, you resorted to violence. Do you understand what you've done? Patricia's eyes brimmed with tears now, black streaks of mascara cutting down her cheeks. Her hands shook as she reached toward Adrian in desperation. Please. I made a mistake. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to get caught, Adrian cut in, his voice like a blade. But you absolutely meant to humiliate her. You meant every word, every sneer, every insult. You meant that slap. And now, you'll face the consequences. The weight of his words fell heavy on the restaurant. Diners shifted, some nodding in grim approval, others whispering to each other about the inevitable fallout. Patricia Hartwell, queen of Beverly Hills society, was now reduced to a trembling woman clinging to excuses in front of a crowd that no longer believed her. Celeste looked at Adrian, her dark eyes shimmering with pain but also with pride. For the first time in years, she realized, she wasn't facing this kind of cruelty alone. She had a shield now, and that shield was unbreakable. Adrian's hand closed protectively over hers. My wife doesn't need your pity, he told Patricia. She doesn't need your apology. What she deserves, what she will have, is justice. Patricia's breath caught. Justice, she repeated weakly, the word foreign and terrifying on her tongue. Adrian's green eyes burned. Yes. Justice. And it begins tonight. Patricia's knees nearly buckled under the weight of Adrian's words. The word justice was a guillotine hovering above her carefully constructed life, ready to drop. Her mind spun with frantic calculations, reputations, investors, her husband's empire, the endless Beverly Hills luncheons where power was currency and whispers sharper than knives. One scandal, one viral video, could reduce it all to rubble. Her tears flowed freely now, smudging mascara into uneven streaks. She reached out, her voice breaking, clinging to the last scrap of authority she thought might still protect her. Please, Mr. Williams. Adrian, you have to understand. I wasn't thinking clearly. I've had a difficult week. My husband's business, our family, everything depends on our good standing in this community. If this gets out. Adrian cut her off with a glare that froze her in place. You should have thought about your family before you decided to assault mine. The silence in Spago was suffocating. Diners shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others staring in unflinching fascination. The glow of phone screens illuminated faces as video after video uploaded in real time, spreading Patricia's disgrace beyond these walls. Somewhere in the distance, Celeste imagined, Twitter was already ablaze. Patricia's lip trembled. I'll apologize. Publicly, if necessary. I'll donate to any cause your wife chooses. You think this is about money? Adrian's voice cracked like a whip. That writing a check will erase what you did? That charity can buy back dignity you tried to destroy? Celeste squeezed his hand, her voice emerging steady, clear, and resonant enough to fill every corner of the dining room. No, she said. She doesn't get to erase this with money. She called me pathetic. She told me I didn't belong. She raised her hand against me because she thought I was powerless. And that has nothing to do with your billions, Adrian. It has everything to do with the fact that people like her think they can decide who deserves respect. The word struck like lightning. Patrons nodded, murmurs of agreement rising like the swell of an approaching storm. Some dabbed at their eyes, others tightened their jaws. The simple honesty in Celeste's voice carried more weight than any fortune could. Patricia's breath hitched. She turned toward Celeste, desperate now. Please, I was wrong. I can change. Just give me another chance. I'll prove I'm not that person. Celeste's eyes burned into hers, unwavering. Then prove it, she said. Not with your money. Not with your social connections. Prove it by humbling yourself. Prove it by stepping outside your ivory tower and actually seeing the people you dismiss. Volunteer. Serve those you look down on. Earn redemption through action, not excuses. The crowd stirred. Some nodded approvingly, their whispers filling the air like judgment passed. The elderly man who had defended Celeste earlier gave her a small, proud nod. Patricia's mouth fell open in shock. Volunteer, she repeated, the word tasting foreign, bitter. Yes, Celeste said firmly. For 6 months. At a literacy center, in an underprivileged community. Where people are fighting every day to earn opportunities you take for granted. You will read to children who don't have parents at home. You will help stock shelves at food pantries. You will see lives that don't have marble foyers and gala dinners. And you will learn. Adrian's lips curved into the faintest smile, though his eyes still burned with anger. Justice with purpose, he murmured. Patricia's face blanched. You can't be serious. Me? In some rundown school or shelter? I wouldn't even know what to do. Celeste didn't flinch. Then you'll learn. Or you'll face the alternative. Patricia blinked rapidly, panic flashing across her face. The alternative? Adrian's voice was low, lethal. We pursue every legal avenue. Assault charges. Civil damages. And believe me, Mrs. Hartwell, I don't lose in courtrooms any more than I lose in boardrooms. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Patricia staggered backward, gripping the chair like it might save her from drowning. Please, please don't do this. My children. Adrian's gaze hardened. My wife is someone's child too. Did you think about that before you raised your hand? Tears poured down Patricia's face. She crumpled into the chair, shoulders shaking, her hands pressed to her mouth. The queen of Beverly Hills society reduced to a sobbing wreck before an audience that no longer respected her. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the elderly man's voice, steady and resolute, broke through again. Your wife handled herself with dignity tonight, Mr. Williams. More dignity than many in this room deserved. Including Mrs. Hartwell. The statement drew a soft murmur of agreement, and Celeste felt tears prickle her eyes, but these were different from the ones Patricia had caused earlier. These were tears of recognition. Of respect earned, not demanded. Patricia, trembling, nodded frantically. I'll do it. The volunteer work. Whatever you ask. Celeste regarded her coolly. Good. Because this isn't about you anymore. It's about the people you dismissed so easily. About making sure what you did tonight doesn't repeat itself with someone else. Adrian leaned down, kissing Celeste's temple tenderly. You're incredible, he whispered. But Patricia wasn't finished. Not yet. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and in that instant, something hardened in her eyes. The mask of contrition slipped, replaced by cold calculation. She straightened, smoothing her dress, her tears vanishing as quickly as they'd come. Actually, she said, her voice stronger now. I need to reconsider this situation. The crowd gasped. Adrian's jaw locked. Celeste's heart sank. Patricia Hartwell had just decided she wasn't going down quietly. The air in Spago tightened, as if every molecule in the room sensed the shift. A moment ago, Patricia had seemed broken, a woman drowning in regret. But as she straightened, mascara still streaking her cheeks, her eyes hardened with a glint of dangerous resolve. It was the look of someone cornered who decided, in desperation, to fight her way out with claws bared. Reconsider? Adrian's voice was deadly quiet, his arm tightening protectively around Celeste. Reconsider what, exactly? Patricia smoothed the front of her Chanel dress with trembling but determined hands. The tremor wasn't weakness anymore, it was defiance, reshaped into arrogance. I've been sitting here, she began, her voice regaining that polished, authoritative tone that had once commanded Beverly Hills cocktail parties. Listening to threats. To ultimatums. To humiliation. But I think it's time I reminded everyone exactly who I am, and why my family's name still matters. A murmur spread through the diners, low and uneasy. Phones tilted higher. The collective tension grew unbearable. Celeste felt her chest tighten. She had seen this before, not from Patricia specifically, but from people like her. The moment when entitlement refuses to admit defeat, when arrogance turns venomous. Patricia turned on Celeste, her voice dripping acid. You may have fooled my husband into marrying you, but I know exactly what you are. You're nothing more than a gold digger who got lucky. The words detonated in the room like explosives. Gasps erupted. Forks clattered against plates. The elderly man who had defended Celeste shook his head in disgust, muttering, shameful. Adrian's head snapped toward Patricia, his jaw tightening so hard Celeste thought his teeth might shatter. Watch your mouth, he warned, his tone lethal. But Patricia, blinded by panic and pride, pressed on. No, I won't. I've spent the last hour being vilified, but let's stop pretending this is about dignity. Everyone here knows what's really going on. Women like her, she gestured toward Celeste with a manicured finger, they play the long game. They position themselves perfectly, weaving sob stories and humble routines until some wealthy fool thinks he's found a saint. Celeste's stomach dropped. The words weren't just cruel, they were knives sharpened to pierce every insecurity she'd wrestled with since marrying Adrian. Adrian's voice thundered. Enough. But Patricia was beyond caution now. She leaned forward, her voice rising as she addressed the room like a courtroom of peers. Tell me, doesn't it seem just a little too perfect? The struggling literacy teacher just happens to be in the same cafe as one of the wealthiest men in America? And she just happens to be passionate, articulate, beautiful enough to capture his attention? Please. Do you really think that was fate? She planned it. Staged it. Probably spent weeks figuring out where billionaires like him drink their coffee. A ripple of disbelieving murmurs swept through the diners. Some shook their heads, appalled. But Celeste saw it, flickers of uncertainty in a few faces. The poison was spreading. Her breath caught painfully. Patricia's words twisted her life, her love, into something sordid and calculated. Adrian's hands balled into fists at his sides. You don't know what you're talking about, he seethed. Patricia pounced on the hesitation in his tone, mistaking his fury for doubt. Don't I? She sneered. Look at her. The modest clothes, the refusal to spend money, the carefully curated, humble routine. It's all a performance designed to make her seem different from every other woman chasing your fortune. And you fell for it. Celeste flinched, the accusations cutting deeper than the slap had. Because beneath the venom, Patricia had dug up the very fears Celeste had never voiced aloud. Hadn't she wondered sometimes if people saw her that way? Hadn't she doubted, late at night, whether she truly belonged in Adrian's world? Her chest tightened, her throat constricting. Tears threatened at the edges of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Patricia's voice grew more vicious, every word a dagger. She's been playing you since day one, Adrian. Every smile, every selfless act, every story about her childhood struggles, all calculated to keep you convinced you're her savior. The perfect billionaire husband rescuing the poor girl from Detroit. Classic con artist narrative. Stop, Adrian growled, his voice trembling with rage. But Celeste raised a trembling hand, her voice soft but resolute. No. Let her finish. Adrian turned toward her, startled. Celeste. Let everyone hear exactly what she thinks of me, Celeste said, her voice breaking but steady. Let them see her for what she is. Patricia's lips curled into a triumphant smile, mistaking Celeste's courage for surrender. Gladly, she spat. Because the truth is, she never loved you, Adrian. She loved what your money could do for her. The mansions. The cars. The lifestyle. All that talk about helping children, about literacy programs and selflessness. A convenient smokescreen while she adapted to private jets and gala dinners with ease. She's not your partner. She's your parasite. The room went deathly still. No one dared breathe. The venom was thick in the air, choking, suffocating. Adrian stared at his wife, his green eyes searching hers with desperation. Not because he doubted her, but because Patricia had thrown a spear at the very heart of their marriage, and he needed reassurance that it had bounced off, not pierced through. And in that heartbeat of searching silence, Celeste felt something inside her fracture. Not her love, not her loyalty, but the fragile dam she had built to hold back years of exhaustion, of doubt, of battles she never asked for. Her voice cracked like porcelain. I can't do this anymore. Adrian's face blanched. Celeste. Her words spilled out, raw and aching. I can't keep living my life on trial. Every room I walk into, every glance, every whisper, I'm judged before I even open my mouth. I'm tired, Adrian. Tired of proving I belong. Tired of defending our love to people who will never believe it's real. Patricia's cruel smile widened. She thought she had won. But she hadn't seen the storm still gathering in Adrian's eyes. And she hadn't understood yet, Celeste's breaking wasn't weakness. It was transformation. The restaurant had fallen into an eerie silence. The soft clinking of glasses and low hum of conversation that had once filled Spago were gone. Now, the room vibrated with the echoes of Patricia's venom. Celeste stood frozen, her chest tight, her pulse wild. Her words still hung in the air, I can't do this anymore. And though she hadn't meant to say them, though they had clawed out of her like an open wound, she knew everyone had heard. Adrian's grip on her hand tightened desperately. Celeste, don't, his voice was low, pleading. He could hear the finality in her tone, the way despair had crept into her spirit like an invader. But Patricia, seeing the crack, smiled like a predator who had tasted blood. You see, she said, her tone sharp and gleeful. Even she admits it. She can't keep up the act. She's exhausted from playing her little role. Celeste flinched at the words, each one dragging her further into the quicksand of self-doubt. Her voice trembled. Maybe you're right, she whispered, her eyes blurring with tears. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I don't belong here. Not in your world, Adrian. Not in any of this. Adrian's entire body stiffened. His green eyes burned with anguish, his voice raw. No. Don't you dare believe her. Celeste, you belong everywhere. You belong with me. But Patricia's laughter, brittle, triumphant, cut through his plea. Oh, how poetic. The billionaire begging his wife not to leave him. How humiliating. For both of you. The words landed like stones, and Celeste's knees wavered. Adrian reached to steady her, but her gaze fell downward, as though the ground itself was pulling her in. And then, from across the room, a voice spoke. Calm. Strong. Resonant with age and truth. Enough. Every head turned. The elderly man who had defended Celeste earlier pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. His posture was stooped with years, but his presence filled the room with a quiet authority that no amount of money or pedigree could command. His cane tapped softly against the marble floor as he walked toward their table. Patricia's smug expression faltered. Excuse me? The man stopped just beside Celeste, his weathered hand resting lightly on his cane. His eyes, wise, kind, and lined with decades of living, turned to her first. My dear, don't you dare let that woman's poison take root in you. Celeste blinked at him, startled. Her lips parted, but no words came. The man's gaze shifted to Patricia, his voice steady as steel. You should be ashamed. I've lived long enough to know the difference between a parasite and a partner. And I'll tell you what I see when I look at this young woman. The room leaned in, the diners hanging on every syllable. I see grace, he continued. I see strength. I see someone who carries herself with dignity even when insulted in front of strangers. And I see a love so genuine it terrifies you, because you've never had it, and you never will. Patricia's mouth snapped shut, her painted lips trembling with outrage. The man turned back to Celeste, his expression softening. You are not on trial here, child. You don't have to prove anything to people who thrive on cruelty. Your worth isn't defined by their whispers. And your love, he glanced at Adrian, whose eyes were shining, that speaks louder than any slander. Celeste's throat tightened, a sob threatening to escape. She had expected Adrian's defense, yes, but not this, not a stranger standing before her, cutting through Patricia's lies with a truth she had almost forgotten herself. For the first time since Patricia's attack, she felt her shoulders straighten. A flicker of warmth lit in her chest, fighting back the shadows. Patricia scoffed, desperate to reclaim control. Oh please. Spare us the sentimental speech. You don't know her. The man's eyes sharpened. I don't have to know her past to see her present. And right now, I see a woman who doesn't need your validation, or anyone else's. Least of all yours. The room erupted in applause. Not loud, not boisterous, but steady, the kind of applause that comes from hearts moved, not hands entertained. Celeste gasped softly, her hand pressing to her chest. For a moment, she thought her knees might give way, not from weakness this time, but from the overwhelming wave of relief, of recognition, of belonging. Adrian leaned close, his voice hoarse but full of fire. You hear that? That's who you are, Celeste. Not what she says. Not what they whisper. Who you are. Celeste turned to him, her tear-filled eyes finally steady. The doubt still lingered, but something had shifted. Patricia's venom hadn't won. Not completely. And Patricia, seeing her victory slip through her fingers, began to tremble with fury. The tide had turned. And she knew it. For a long, suspended moment, the applause lingered like a tide against Patricia's brittle fury. Celeste stood in its echo, her hand still pressed against her heart, her tears falling but no longer from humiliation. Something inside her, something Patricia had nearly extinguished, began to glow again. Adrian squeezed her hand, his voice steady despite the storm. This is your moment, love. Don't let her write your story. Celeste's breath caught. Her story. For too long, she had let others define it, the tabloids with their glossy lies, the critics with their cruel words, Patricia with her sharp tongue. But now, in the hush of Spago, she felt a shift. A realization. Her story was hers to tell. Celeste lifted her chin. The room seemed to lean toward her, waiting. Her voice, when it came, trembled, but not with fear. With conviction. "You think I don't belong," she said, her gaze locking on Patricia. "You think I'm unworthy because I wasn't born into wealth, because I don't wear your labels, because I don't fit into the box you've built to keep yourself superior." Patricia's mouth twisted, ready to strike back, but Celeste didn't falter. "But let me tell you what you don't know." Her voice rose, clear and strong now. "I didn't come from money. I didn't have connections or privilege. What I had was grit. What I had was faith. What I had was the will to build a life for myself when the world told me I'd never matter." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Celeste's voice carried the weight of truth, unpolished and powerful. "I graduated at the top of my class," she continued, her eyes blazing. "Not because doors were opened for me, but because I kicked them down. I started my career at the bottom, working hours you couldn't imagine. And when life told me no, I worked harder until it had no choice but to say yes." Adrian's chest swelled with pride as he listened. For the first time, Celeste wasn't just enduring, she was claiming her power. Patricia rolled her eyes, but her confidence was slipping. "Spare us the sob story. You're still." Celeste cut her off with a voice sharp as a blade. "I am still here. And despite everything you've tried to say tonight, you can't take that away from me." The applause began again, louder this time. Celeste's shoulders squared, her presence undeniable. "You call me unworthy, Patricia," she said, her voice calm now, almost tender. "But that's not about me. That's about you. Because deep down, you know money can buy clothes, and it can buy a seat at this table, but it can't buy character. It can't buy loyalty. It can't buy love." She turned slightly, her eyes sweeping the room. "And that's why you're so afraid of me. Because I don't need your approval. I don't need to play your games. I am enough exactly as I am." The restaurant erupted. Applause. Cheers. Even laughter from some who had once stayed silent. The tide had fully turned, and Celeste stood tall in the center of it all, no longer the victim, but the victor. Patricia's face flushed crimson, her composure cracking. "You, how dare you?" But her voice was drowned out by the crowd, by the undeniable force of Celeste's truth echoing through the room. Adrian pulled her close, his lips brushing her ear. "That's my wife." Celeste closed her eyes briefly, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time all evening, the weight on her chest lifted. She had spoken. And she had been heard. Patricia had come to humiliate her. Instead, she had made her unforgettable. The applause ebbed, not with the chaos of a crowd, but with the steady hush of a verdict delivered. It left behind a clarity that made every sound in Spago feel unnaturally crisp, the soft whir of the ceiling vents, the crystalline tick of a watch 2 tables over, the uneven catch of Patricia Hartwell's breath as she realized the room no longer belonged to her. She tried to reclaim it anyway. "This is slander," she snapped, voice quivering toward fury as she swept her gaze across the phone still recording. "You're all complicit in defamation. You," she jabbed a finger at the elderly man, "are a meddler who didn't hear the first half of anything. And you," she turned on the manager, "are about to lose the most valuable patron your establishment has." Robert, the manager, blanched but didn't bow. "Not now." His eyes flicked to Adrian, as if measuring where the center of gravity really was. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm obligated to preserve our security footage and cooperate fully with any investigation," he managed, words careful but clear, the first line he'd drawn all night. Patricia's jaw slackened. For a second, her practiced smile panicked into something raw. Then it hardened. "Delete it," she hissed. "All of it. I'll handle whatever damage control is necessary." Robert took a step back, horrified. "I can't." "You will," she bit out. "Or I will." "You will do nothing," Adrian said, the words so even they felt carved in granite. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. "Robert, lock the footage. Duplicate it to off-site. Hand a copy to the Beverly Hills Police Department when they arrive." Patricia's head snapped up. "You called the police?" Adrian's eyes were glacier calm. "A woman was assaulted in public. Of course I called." A few diners who had tried to pretend they weren't watching let out little, involuntary exhalations, like the room itself was finally allowed to breathe. Across the banquette, a woman in a sleek black jumpsuit angled her phone vertically and murmured to the thousands watching her live stream, "Yes, that's the Adrian Williams. Yes, it happened. No, she's not the victim." Patricia's gaze caught the stream of comments crawling up that screen. "She hit her? I saw the slap. Spago cameras will have it. And something feral flickered behind her eyes. She fumbled for her own phone, thumbs flying. "I'm calling my husband. Gregory will take care of this. He'll have your investors by morning and your board by noon." "Call him," Adrian said, which she clearly hadn't expected. "Put him on speaker." Her hand froze. For one slippery second, she looked like a swimmer realizing the water was deeper than she thought. Still, pride pushed the button. She flicked the speaker icon, and the line rang twice. "Pat?" Gregory's voice came through tinny and tired. "I'm in a late meeting. Can it?" "Greg, thank God. You need to." "Is it true?" he cut in, voice gone very flat. "I just got a text from Megan. She's here with a client 2 tables over, and she says you hit someone." Patricia's mouth opened, then reshaped itself around an old, familiar lie. It was self-defense. She was aggressive. "She was the woman you hit Adrian Williams's wife?" Gregory asked. The room could have been empty for how quiet it went, even the servers had stilled. Patricia swallowed. I didn't know who she was." On the line, paper rustled. A chair scraped. When Gregory spoke again, he sounded like a man placing his palm against glass and feeling it crack. "Patricia, Nexus Innovations is finalizing a headquarters contract with us next week. $200 million. We leveraged lines against the expected cash flow." He paused. "Tell me I'm not about to lose that." Adrian didn't blink. "You are," he said, crisp as a signature. Patricia flinched as if struck again. "Adrian," she said quickly, the practiced lilt back in her voice, "we can fix this." "We can." "There is nothing to fix," he replied without looking at her. "There is only what happened, and the consequences that follow." "Mr. Williams," Gregory said, voice tight with a composure clearly strangling panic. "I apologize if my wife." "She assaulted my wife," Adrian said. "In a room full of witnesses. You'll be hearing from my general counsel in the morning. The RFP is being reopened tonight." On the other end, something fragile gave way. "Patricia," Gregory whispered, and in that low, wrecked syllable was a decade of dinners and donor galas, of careful deals and the belief that money could buffer anything. "What did you do?" The call ended without goodbyes. The silence he left behind was a sound in itself. Patricia stared at her phone like it had betrayed her. Then, in a move so abrupt half the room startled, she pitched forward into a dramatic swoon, catching herself against the table's edge and sliding to her knees. I can't breathe," she gasped, palm to her throat. "I need someone, call." "Liar," someone muttered, not unkindly, just tired. I'm a physician, a man near the bar said, already kneeling, fingers professional on her wrist. He looked up within seconds, unimpressed. Pulse is strong. Breathing normal. No syncope. He rocked back on his heels. She's fine. A low ripple of rueful laughter moved through the diners, not cruel, just human. The performance had failed. The spotlight, once her accomplice, now illuminated the seams. Patricia scrambled upright, dignity punctured, and went for a different prop. She reached for a half-full wineglass, as if to drink, then hesitated, eyes cutting to Celeste with dark calculation. Celeste didn't move. She merely watched the glass tilt, the surface quiver, and knew, bone deep, that if Patricia threw it, she would be trying to carve herself a new narrative. Chaos, mutual fault, it all got out of hand. Adrian saw it, too. Don't, he said softly. For the first time, she listened. Two men in dark suits appeared at the entrance just then, moving with the unhurried efficiency of people who knew they didn't need to announce themselves. The maitre d' met them, a quick exchange, a nod toward Adrian, and they approached. Mr. Williams, the taller one said. We came as soon as we received your message. Thank you, Daniel. Adrian angled slightly so they formed a quiet wall around Celeste without making a spectacle of it. Please wait with Mrs. Hartwell near the entrance. The police will want statements. Patricia recoiled. You can't detain me. We aren't detaining you, Daniel said evenly. We're asking you to wait until officers arrive so they can hear from everyone while the scene is intact. I refuse. You may, he said, and that refusal will be part of the report. The live streamer near the banquette narrated softly to her viewers, they're not manhandling her. They're containing the damage. Heart icons floated up the screen. Celeste felt none of the vindictive satisfaction she might have expected. What she felt was a complicated, aching relief. No screaming. No shoving. Just the slow, heavy work of restoring order after someone lit a match and tried to convince the room it was dusk. The elderly man stepped closer, his wife at his side now, a fine-boned woman with a posture that spoke of another life full of standing. Officer or no officer, he said to no one and everyone, we'll wait and give our statements. Robert exhaled, shoulders dropping a fraction. Thank you, sir. The woman touched Celeste's arm. I was an ER nurse for 30 years, she said with a small smile that didn't minimize what had happened. If you feel lightheaded later, it might just be adrenaline leaving. Sip water. Breathe. Thank you, Celeste whispered, throat tight. Patricia jerked free of Daniel's gentle cue to move and hurled one last gambit into the room. This is a witch hunt, she declared, as if volume could substitute for reality. Look at her, she pointed at Celeste's simple dress like an exhibit, and look at this theater you've staged to make me a villain. He threatened me. He threatened our livelihood. Adrian's phone vibrated. He glanced down, thumbed a single message to his COO, reopen HQ bids. Note reason, vendor conduct misaligned with Nexus ethics policy. Announce internal at 9 a.m. And slipped the device away. When he looked up, his expression had gentled again, his anger cooling to the steadier heat of purpose. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, his tone almost clinical now, I'm not interested in destroying you. I'm interested in drawing a line. You crossed it. The world will decide what that means for you. In the meantime, my responsibility is here. He turned to Celeste fully, letting the room fall away. With her. It was such a simple pivot, away from spectacle, back to the small, sacred circle of two, that it felt like a kind of courage rarer than rage. Celeste's lungs loosened. The sting at her cheek was still there, a pulse under the skin, but the shame that had tried to graft itself to it slipped away like a poorly tied ribbon. Are you okay? He asked, voice low enough that it was for her alone. I will be, she said, honest and steady. A new hush rolled in. Through the front windows, blue and red strobes strobed softly against the glass. Beverly Hills police were efficient on good nights, more so when half the room could afford counsel. 2 uniformed officers entered, their faces composed, their pens ready for the post-smartphone ritual of, "Let's see the videos." "Evening," the taller officer said. "We received a call regarding an assault. We'll need to take statements and review any footage available." Robert stepped forward with relief so palpable it almost looked like gratitude. "We have camera angles covering this section," he said. "I've preserved the files." "Thank you." The officer nodded to a nearby table, now transformed into a small administrative island. "We'll begin with the victim, then witnesses." He glanced at Celeste. "Ma'am, whenever you're ready." Adrian started to speak, "We can do this tomorrow," but Celeste shook her head gently. "Now," she said. "I'd rather not take this home with me." She walked to the officers with her shoulders back, not to dramatize, not to perform, but because she had already decided what this night would mean in her story. She sat. She told the truth with the calm cadence of a teacher explaining a lesson she had mastered and never wanted to teach again. She approached. "She called me lost. She said people like me didn't belong. She accused me of cons. I told her I would not leave. She slapped me." The officer didn't interrupt. He didn't look for holes. He simply nodded, the kind of listening that is its own form of respect. When she finished, he said, "Thank you," and meant it. "Would you consent to a photo of the injury?" "Yes," Celeste said, and the quick flash, when it came, felt like light landing on truth, not the other way around. They moved on, elderly man, our nurse, a couple in sequins who had been silent until now but found their voices because someone else had first found hers. The live streamer angled her phone away at last, whispering, "I think that's enough," to her audience, and ended the broadcast with a final shot of Celeste, not her cheek, not the mark, but her face, and the way it held. Patricia maintained her stubborn orbit near the door, arms folded, chin high. When her turn came, she tried to thread the needle between denial and self-preservation. "It was a misunderstanding. I felt threatened. I acted reflexively." The officer wrote, then looked up with the kind of patient neutrality that was nearly ruthless. "Were you seated at your own table when you felt threatened?" She hesitated. "No." "Did she stand? Raise her voice? Make any physical move toward you?" "Another beat?" "No." He nodded once. "Thank you." When it was done, they didn't cuff Patricia. They didn't need to for the law to have entered the room. They issued a citation and told her a detective would follow up. The process was mundane, anticlimactic, and somehow exactly right. Justice rarely arrives as a movie scene. More often, it is a clipboard and a case number, a series of small, procedural mercies that say, "We saw what you saw." Daniel gestured, and Patricia finally allowed herself to be guided to the corridor. Near the threshold, she pivoted one last time, eyes flicking to Celeste, searching for shame to devour or pride to wound. She found neither. Only a woman sitting with her husband, hand in his, telling the truth to a pair of officers who treated it like what it was, enough. The door side shut behind her. The strobes faded. The room exhaled. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then forks lifted, conversations restarted in softer registers, a server appeared at the edge of the table with 2 fresh club sodas and the tentative bravery of someone stepping back onto a bus that had just survived a crash. Robert smoothed his tie, approached, and stopped at a respectful distance. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams," he said. "There is no comp that makes this right, but your meal tonight is our responsibility. So are your future meals, if you choose to return. And, forgive me if this is forward, I would be grateful for your counsel on how my staff can be trained to see moments like this sooner. To intervene better." Adrian looked at Celeste. It was her night to answer. "We'll help," she said simply. "Not because of who we are. Because of who comes next. Robert swallowed, nodded, and retreated to give them space. They were alone again, as alone as two people can be in a room that has memorized them. The waitstaff refolded the napkins. The sommelier pretended not to watch. The kitchen returned to its choreography. Celeste touched her cheek, and for the first time, the heat there felt like the last warmth of a day that had refused to end badly. "Do you want to go home?" Adrian asked softly. "I thought I did," Celeste said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "But now I think I want what we came here for. A quiet dinner. With you." A slow smile unfurled across his face, relief, pride, love, all in one simple human curve. "Then we'll eat." He signaled gently, and the next course emerged as if the kitchen had been waiting for permission to believe in good endings again. Celeste lifted her glass. Adrian met it. The soft click of crystal was smaller than the slap that had started the night, but it echoed further. "To us," he murmured. "To us," she said, and somewhere underneath the table, where the phones couldn't reach, their fingers wove together like a promise spoken in a language only the two of them knew. For a moment, silence held the room like a taut string. Patricia stood trembling with rage, her champagne glass still dripping down her wrist, her voice caught in her throat. She had spent years controlling rooms like this, commanding them, bending them to her narrative. But tonight, the tide had shifted. Celeste didn't move toward her this time. She didn't need to. The energy in the room had already turned against Patricia. "Adrian," Patricia stammered suddenly, her voice cracking. She turned to him, desperation etched across her face. "You can't possibly let this performance stand. You know who I am. What I represent. She's just. Enough," Adrian said, his voice booming with finality. The firmness in his tone sent a ripple through the room. "Patricia, you've crossed every line tonight. You disrespected my wife. You tried to humiliate her. And worst of all, you showed this entire room exactly who you are, entitled, cruel, and empty." A sharp murmur swept through the crowd. Some nodded. Others whispered. And Patricia, for the first time, looked genuinely shaken. "I have tolerated your behavior for too long because of business ties and old friendships," Adrian continued, his jaw tight. "But tonight, those ties are cut. Effective immediately." Patricia's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with panic. You can't mean that." Adrian didn't flinch. "I do. The contracts we had with Hartwell Group, consider them terminated. You wanted to show everyone your power tonight. Now they've seen the truth, you have none." A collective gasp filled the air. The words hit harder than any slap. "No." Patricia's voice pitched higher, shrill with desperation. "You can't do this to me. You can't just." But Adrian wasn't the only one stepping forward. "Actually," came a calm voice from a nearby table. A woman in a tailored gray suit rose to her feet, her expression sharp. "He can. And I'd like to add that my firm will also be ending negotiations with Hartwell Group after this disgraceful display." It was Marissa Clark, one of Wall Street's most respected power brokers. Heads turned, and more voices rose in agreement. "Our foundation won't be working with them either," another guest said firmly. "Nor will my company," added a CEO near the bar. It was like dominoes falling. One by one, Patricia's alliances crumbled before her eyes. "No, wait," she tried, her voice cracking now, stripped of its usual poise. "You don't understand, she's nobody. She's—" Celeste finally stepped forward again, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am somebody. And so is every person you've ever treated this way. Tonight isn't just about me, Patricia. It's about the way women like you try to erase women like me, and fail." The crowd roared with applause, a wave of vindication washing through the room. Patricia's face collapsed into something almost childlike: fear, confusion, disbelief. For the first time, she realized her armor of wealth and status wasn't enough. Adrian placed his arm around Celeste. "We're leaving," he said calmly, guiding her away from the table. "This night doesn't belong to her anymore. It belongs to you." As they walked out, the crowd parted for them, their applause rising into a standing ovation. Phones lifted, cameras flashed, and Celeste, once humiliated, once silenced, walked tall, radiant, and untouchable. Behind them, Patricia stood alone. Her allies gone. Her reputation shattered. Her power stripped. The slap she thought would silence Celeste had only destroyed herself. By the next morning, the scene at Spago Beverly Hills had already become legend. Clips of Patricia's slap, Adrian's cutting dismissal, and Celeste's poised rebuttal had flooded social media overnight. Every angle, every word, every gasp had been recorded and replayed thousands of times. By dawn, hashtags like #StandWithCeleste, #slap backfired, and #Hartwell collapse were trending worldwide. Patricia had always believed she owned the narrative. But this time, the narrative owned her. News outlets pounced on the story, each headline sharper than the last. Entitled heiress slaps billionaire's wife, loses fortune overnight. Adrian Dubois cuts ties with Hartwell Group after public disgrace. Celeste Dubois, the woman who stood tall against privilege. Morning talk shows replayed the footage on loop, dissecting every second with panels of analysts and psychologists. "This was more than a slap," one commentator said. "This was a cultural reckoning." Patricia Hartwell represented the old guard, elitist, untouchable. Celeste represents the new, strength, dignity, and grace. Celebrities weighed in. Activists. Politicians. Within hours, Celeste had become a symbol of resilience. And Patricia had become a meme. One particularly viral clip showed Patricia shrieking, "She's nobody," while Celeste calmly responded, "I am somebody." The line had already been printed on t-shirts by noon. In her penthouse, Patricia's world spun out of control. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, calls from furious board members, texts from family, emails from journalists. The Hartwell Group's stock had plummeted by 17% in a single morning. Longtime investors were pulling out. Business partners were issuing public statements condemning her behavior. "Fix it," Patricia snapped at her publicist, pacing the marble floors with disheveled hair and smeared mascara. "Spin it. Blame it on the editing. Say it was taken out of context." Her publicist sighed heavily. "Patricia, the video is everywhere. There's no spin strong enough to erase the optics. You slapped a black woman in public, insulted her, then called her a nobody, all while Adrian Dubois defended her and destroyed your credibility. The world isn't buying excuses anymore." Patricia froze, gripping the edge of the table. "So what do I do? For starters?" The publicist's voice was cold. "You apologize. Publicly. Sincerely." Patricia's jaw clenched. "I don't apologize. Then you'll lose everything." The words hit harder than Adrian's. For once, Patricia had no retort. Meanwhile, Celeste refused interviews. She turned down talk show invitations, brand deals, even op-eds begging for her perspective. When asked why, she told Adrian simply, "The truth spoke for itself last night. I don't need to add to it." Her silence, paradoxically, made her even more powerful. People filled the void with admiration, calling her a woman of grace and a queen of quiet strength. Adrian watched her from across the breakfast table, pride swelling in his chest. "You've done what few could," he said softly. "You've changed the conversation, without lifting a hand, without raising your voice. You've shown that real power doesn't shout. It stands tall." Celeste smiled faintly. I didn't change the conversation, Adrian. Patricia did, by trying to erase me. All I did was refuse to disappear. Over the next week, Hartwell Group crumbled piece by piece. Luxury partners severed contracts. Charity boards removed Patricia's name from plaques. Invitations dried up. Even her so-called friends began ghosting her, unwilling to be tainted by association. And while Patricia scrambled to salvage her empire, Adrian and Celeste received calls of a different kind. Invitations poured in from global forums, women's leadership conferences, and humanitarian organizations. Celeste, who had once been dismissed as the wife in the background, was now a headline speaker. When she finally agreed to attend one event, a Women in Business Summit in New York, tickets sold out within hours. Attendees weren't just coming to see Adrian's wife. They were coming to see the woman who had turned humiliation into history. On the 7th day, Patricia finally broke. She sat before a camera in her penthouse, makeup flawless, voice trembling. The PR team had crafted every word. I want to sincerely apologize to Celeste Dubois, to Adrian, and to everyone who witnessed my actions that night. I was out of line, and my behavior does not reflect the values I claim to stand for. I ask for forgiveness. The video went live. But instead of softening the world, it backfired. People dissected her flat tone, her carefully scripted delivery. Comments poured in, she's only sorry because she lost money. If Adrian hadn't cut her off, she wouldn't have said a word. Too little, too late. The apology trended, but not in the way Patricia hoped. 2 weeks later, Celeste stood on stage at the summit. The audience of thousands rose to their feet before she even spoke. She looked out over the sea of faces, remembering the sting of Patricia's slap, the sting of being called a nobody. Then she spoke, her voice calm and steady. They say power is measured by how loudly you can silence someone else. But real power is standing tall when someone tries to erase you. That night wasn't about a slap. It was about a choice, to shrink into silence or to rise into myself. And I chose to rise. The applause thundered, shaking the room. Cameras flashed. And Celeste knew, this was only the beginning. Patricia Hartwell had always thought of herself as untouchable. But by the 3rd week after the incident, that illusion had crumbled into dust. The Hartwell Group's stock never recovered. Investors who once begged Patricia for her attention now refused to answer her calls. The family empire that had been carefully cultivated for 3 generations teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. One morning, Patricia entered the boardroom expecting to command loyalty. Instead, she found herself facing stone-faced directors. Effective immediately, the chairman announced, "You are being removed as CEO of Hartwell Group. The brand has suffered catastrophic damage under your leadership. We cannot allow one person's ego to cost thousands their livelihoods." Patricia's mouth went dry. "You can't do this. I am Hartwell." But the vote was unanimous. Within minutes, security escorted her out of the building she once ruled. Cameras swarmed outside, capturing her pale, tight-lipped face as she was forced into the back of a waiting car. The footage went viral. The caption was brutal, "From heiress to exile, Patricia Hartwell removed." Once, Patricia's name had been whispered in reverence at galas and charity balls. Now, it was spoken in disgust. Her closest friends unfollowed her on social media. Invites to exclusive soirees disappeared. Even casual acquaintances avoided her at restaurants, fearful of being photographed at the same table. In one particularly humiliating moment, Patricia attempted to enter a high-society benefit in Los Angeles. The doorman checked the list, then shook his head. "You're not on the guest list, ma'am." Patricia's face flushed scarlet. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," the doorman replied coldly. "That's the problem." The crowd around her chuckled. Patricia fled before the cameras could capture her tears. While Patricia's empire burned, Celeste's light only grew brighter. Her speech at the Women in Business Summit had gone viral, not as a scandal but as an anthem. Headlines declared, Celeste Dubois, from nobody to icon. Global organizations reached out, inviting her to keynote their events. She was offered positions on philanthropic boards, asked to spearhead initiatives for women of color in leadership, and featured on the cover of Time magazine with the headline, Grace Under Fire. Celeste never sought the spotlight, but the spotlight found her. And instead of shrinking from it, she stood tall, using it to uplift others who had once been dismissed as nobodies. Adrian often watched her in awe. "You've surpassed me," he told her one night as they stood on their balcony overlooking Los Angeles. "I may have built an empire, but you've built a legacy." Celeste smiled softly. "No, Adrian. We're building it together." Patricia, cornered and stripped of her titles, grew desperate. In a last-ditch effort to reclaim her relevance, she called a press conference at a downtown hotel. Dressed in an immaculate white suit, she stepped onto the stage, cameras flashing. "I want to set the record straight," she began. "Yes, I made a mistake. But I have been unfairly villainized. I am not a racist, nor am I a monster. I was provoked." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters leaned forward, already smelling blood. Patricia's words were not contrition. They were blame. By the end of the night, clips of her speech dominated the internet. The verdict was swift and merciless: Patricia doubles down on disgrace. Even those who had once pitted her now shook their heads. Her attempt to rewrite the narrative had sealed her fate. Celeste didn't attend Patricia's press conference. She didn't need to. Instead, she spent the evening in a small community center in south-central Los Angeles, speaking with young women about confidence, ambition, and dignity. The contrast was stark. Patricia ranted in a luxury hotel ballroom, while Celeste quietly inspired the next generation in a humble space. One teenager asked her, "How did you stay strong when she called you a nobody?" Celeste smiled gently. "Because I knew she was wrong. And when you know who you are, no one's words can define you." The applause in that small room meant more to her than the global headlines. The following week, Patricia's mansion was listed for sale. Without her company income and with mounting legal fees from shareholder lawsuits, she had no choice but to liquidate assets. Paparazzi captured her moving out, her once glamorous figure now gaunt, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame. She tried to hide behind oversized sunglasses, but the cameras caught every step of her fall from grace. The world that had once envied Patricia Hartwell now pitied her. But Patricia didn't want pity. She wanted power. And she would never have it again. Meanwhile, Celeste received an invitation she could not ignore: a private audience at the United Nations Women's Leadership Forum. When she entered the chamber, world leaders rose to their feet. The ovation lasted nearly a full minute before she could even begin speaking. Celeste, once branded a nobody, had become a symbol of global dignity. She thought of Patricia then, of the slap, the insult, the downfall. And she whispered silently to herself: "Power built on arrogance always crumbles. But power built on truth? That lasts forever." Patricia Hartwell had once believed she was never alone. Even in her solitude, the world revolved around her. Now, for the first time in her life, silence became unbearable. After her removal as CEO, Patricia had fought to maintain at least one thing: her Beverly Hills mansion. But within weeks, it too had become a hollow monument to everything she lost. Rooms once filled with staff and socialites now echoed with the sound of her own footsteps. Dust gathered on marble counters, chandeliers remained unlit, and the grand piano in the parlor sat untouched, a reminder of parties that would never return. She sat in the library one evening, scrolling endlessly on her phone. Old photos stared back, her laughing with senators, clinking glasses with CEOs, posing in couture gowns. She clicked into each one, searching for comments. But where there had once been praise, there was now venom. Disgrace. Good riddance. Patricia who? Her hand trembled as she hurled the phone across the room, the shatter of glass ringing like a verdict. She tried reaching out to her friends. A text to Meredith, her closest ally in New York high society, went unanswered. A call to Charles, who once begged for her sponsorship, ended in a curt, "I'm sorry, Patricia. This isn't a good time." Even her personal assistant of 10 years, who had once followed her every order with devotion, declined her calls. Patricia finally understood. They had never been friends. They had been orbiting her power, not her person. And when her power vanished, so did they. Her face still appeared in the tabloids, but not as the glamorous queen of Beverly Hills. One headline screamed, "Patricia Hartwell seen alone at cafe, from heiress to outcast." Another showed a candid photo of her entering a pharmacy with the caption, "Patricia buys generic shampoo, has the heiress hit rock bottom?" Patricia sobbed when she saw it. Not because of the shampoo, but because she realized they were right, she was no longer untouchable. She was just another fallen figure, stripped of myth. While Patricia drowned in obscurity, Celeste's world only expanded. She received a letter sealed with the golden emblem of the United Nations. It was an invitation to deliver the keynote address at the World Women's Leadership Summit, held in Geneva. Adrian squeezed her hand when she read it aloud. "Celeste, do you understand what this means? This isn't just recognition. This is history." At the summit, the auditorium overflowed with leaders, activists, entrepreneurs, and students from every corner of the globe. When Celeste walked onto the stage, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't the shallow cheer of curiosity, it was thunderous respect. She began softly, her voice steady. "I was once called a nobody. But let me tell you, there is no such thing as a nobody. Every person carries a story that deserves dignity." Her words resonated like music. By the end of her speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted minutes. Many wept openly. That night, newspapers around the world carried her image with headlines like, "Celeste Dubois inspires global stage. From humiliation to hero, the woman who changed the conversation." Patricia, wrapped in a shawl in her dim living room, watched Celeste's speech on television. The sight of Celeste commanding the stage, regal, eloquent, adored, was a dagger to her chest. "That should be me," Patricia whispered bitterly. "I should be the one they cheer for." But deep down, she knew it never could have been. Because Patricia demanded respect. Celeste earned it. One night, Patricia opened a bottle of wine and drank it alone in the grand dining hall that once hosted governors and billionaires. She sat at the head of the 20-foot mahogany table, her reflection staring back at her in the polished surface. The empty chairs mocked her. She raised her glass in a bitter toast. "To friends, to power, to everything I thought I had." Tears rolled down her cheeks as her voice cracked. "And to the woman who took it all." Her words echoed, but there was no one left to hear them. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, Celeste sat quietly after returning from Geneva. She looked at Adrian. "It feels strange, Adrian. I never wanted Patricia's fall. I never asked for her ruin. Yet, it happened because of me." Adrian kissed her forehead. "No, my love. It happened because of her. You simply stood in the light, and her own darkness destroyed her." Celeste nodded, though her heart still carried the weight of empathy. For even at the height of her triumph, she pitied Patricia, the woman who had everything, yet ended with nothing. Patricia Hartwell had once believed money was her last fortress. Even if she lost her company, her friends, her reputation, at least she still had her wealth. But wealth, like loyalty, evaporated faster than she ever imagined. The mahogany dining table where presidents once sat was carried out by movers. Her Picasso sketch fetched a fraction of its worth at auction. Even her diamond-encrusted watch collection was gone within weeks, scooped up by collectors who smirked at her misfortune. Patricia stood in the center of her stripped living room, the chandeliers dim, the Persian rugs rolled away. She tried to keep her spine straight, to preserve a shred of dignity. But when the movers wheeled out the last of her Louis XIV armchairs, her knees buckled. She was no longer a queen. She was a woman surrounded by dust. It came in a crisp white envelope pinned to her gilded gates. Notice of foreclosure. Patricia tore it off with shaking hands. Her heart thudded. She ran to her lawyer, demanding answers, but he avoided her gaze. Patricia, the debts are too high. The lawsuits from shareholders, the penalties, the unpaid loans, there's nothing left to protect. The house will be repossessed. Her voice broke. This is my home. My name built this street. You can't. But they could. And they did. Paparazzi once trailed her every step. Now, when she stumbled through Beverly Hills with a scarf wrapped around her head, no one raised a camera. Strangers passed without a second glance. Some whispered, but most simply didn't care. She was invisible. And for Patricia, invisibility was worse than hatred. Stress consumed her. Her once glossy blonde hair thinned. Her manicured hands trembled constantly. She ignored the doctor's warnings about her blood pressure, choosing instead to drown her nights in wine. One morning, she collapsed in her empty kitchen, a half-empty glass of Chardonnay shattering against the tile. When she awoke in the hospital, alone, a nurse whispered softly, "Do you have someone we can call, ma'am?" Patricia swallowed hard. For the first time in her life, she had no one to name. While Patricia fought shadows, Celeste created light. She and Adrian launched the Celeste Dubois Foundation for Dignity, dedicated to empowering women of color in business and law. The foundation provided scholarships, mentorship, and legal aid for those silenced by prejudice. At its opening gala, hundreds attended. Politicians, celebrities, and CEOs pledged millions. But for Celeste, the highlight was a small group of young women in the front row. They looked at her the way she once looked at women she admired, with awe, hope, and fire in their eyes. Celeste took the microphone. This foundation isn't about me. It's about every young woman who's ever been told she's not enough. Tonight, we begin rewriting that story. The applause was deafening. Adrian wiped away a tear. Patricia watched the gala on a hospital television, her foredrip hissing softly beside her. Celeste glowed in a white gown, standing tall, radiant, beloved. The room cheered as she announced the scholarships, as celebrities hugged her, as Adrian beamed with pride. Patricia's cracked lips whispered, she took everything. But deep down, she knew it wasn't true. Celeste hadn't taken anything. Patricia had thrown it all away. Back at her bare apartment after being discharged, Patricia caught her reflection in a broken vanity mirror she salvaged from storage. Her eyes were sunken. Her skin, pale. The once mighty queen of Beverly Hills now looked like a ghost haunting her own life. She pressed her palm against the glass. "Who are you?" she whispered to the woman staring back. But the mirror gave no answer. That same night, after the gala, Celeste slipped away from the crowd and stood alone on a balcony. The city lights of Los Angeles glittered below. Adrian joined her, wrapping his arm around her waist. "You did it, Celeste," he murmured. This is bigger than business. You've changed lives." She leaned against him, her voice soft. "I only hope Patricia finds peace. No one deserves to die in bitterness." Adrian kissed her temple. "And that's why you're the one they cheer for. Because even when the world turned cruel, you never let it make you cruel too." Celeste closed her eyes, letting the night air wash over her. Her journey had begun in humiliation. Now, it was ending in healing, not only for her, but for countless others. Patricia Hartwell never imagined she'd one day stand in line at a public food pantry. The woman who once owned private jets now clutched a paper bag filled with canned beans and day-old bread. She kept her head low beneath a faded sun hat, but shame clung to her like a second skin. When a volunteer recognized her, Patricia braced for laughter. But worse than laughter came instead, indifference. "Please step aside, ma'am. Others are waiting." She was no longer feared, no longer envied, no longer even hated. She was nothing. Meanwhile, across the city, the Beverly Hills hotel buzzed with flashes of cameras and clinking champagne glasses. The Celeste Dubois Foundation's annual gala had become the most anticipated event of the year, drawing leaders from every industry. Celeste arrived on Adrian's arm, her gown a cascade of midnight silk, her presence commanding yet serene. Reporters clamored for her attention, but she paused only to greet young scholarship recipients, ensuring they felt seen, valued, celebrated. Inside the ballroom, her speech silenced the crowd. "Power," she said, her voice strong, "is not about wealth or intimidation. True power is the ability to lift others while standing firm in your own worth. Years ago, someone tried to strip me of that worth. Tonight, I dedicate this moment not to her downfall, but to every woman who refused to bow to injustice." The applause shook the chandeliers. Adrian watched her with unshakable pride. Word of the gala spread across the news. Unable to resist, Patricia tuned in from a battered TV in the corner of her dingy apartment. She saw Celeste glowing on stage, her name celebrated in headlines. And for the first time, Patricia felt something deeper than anger. She felt regret. Not because she lost her wealth. Not because her empire crumbled. But because she realized, too late, that cruelty had been her only legacy. She whispered into the silence. "They'll never remember me for anything else." Tears, hot and bitter, slipped down her cheeks. Months later, fate forced one last crossing of paths. Patricia, frail and dressed in thrift store clothes, shuffled into a courthouse lobby where Celeste was exiting after a board meeting with her legal team. Their eyes locked. For a moment, Patricia wanted to spit venom, to lash out like she always had. But the words died in her throat. Instead, her lips trembled, and she whispered, "I'm sorry." Celeste paused. The room held its breath. She studied the woman before her, no longer the towering figure who had slapped her in public, but a broken shell. Celeste's voice was calm, steady, almost merciful. "I don't hate you, Patricia. I pity you. I hope you find peace." Then she turned, walked away, and never looked back. Patricia faded into obscurity, her name occasionally surfacing in whispers of caution, a warning of how arrogance destroys. Celeste's name, on the other hand, grew brighter with each passing year. Her foundation expanded globally, changing lives on every continent. At award ceremonies, her speeches inspired millions. At graduations, her mentorship shaped leaders. At home, she and Adrian built a family grounded not in power, but in love. Years after that slap at Spago Beverly Hills, people still recalled it, not as Patricia Hartwell's moment of dominance, but as the spark that ignited Celeste Dubois's rise. One woman had tried to humiliate another. Instead, she humiliated herself before the world. Celeste had not only survived, she had transformed humiliation into triumph, cruelty into compassion, and injustice into justice. Her story became more than just gossip in Beverly Hills. It became a parable whispered across boardrooms, classrooms, and dinner tables. Dignity cannot be stolen. It can only be surrendered. And Celeste Dubois never surrendered. When Patricia Hartwell raised her hand, she thought she was striking down a nobody. Instead, she revealed her own downfall. Celeste Dubois proved that dignity cannot be stolen, it can only be surrendered, and she never surrendered. Let this be a reminder: power without respect is nothing. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to True Echo, share your thoughts in the comments, and spread this story with those who need to hear it. Together, we make every echo louder.